In the United States, approximately 1 out of 4 people will at some point in their lives be diagnosed with clinical depression. Similar numbers are evident in terms of diagnosis of anxiety. These percentages are no longer insignificant, but very, very significant. In fact, I would propose that we are experiencing what I call an epidemic of depression in American culture, perhaps Western culture for that matter. So I ask, why? Why is this epidemic of depression occurring? I have a number of thoughts. Let me present them in this way. Firstly, much of depression as diagnosed as clinical really is what I regard as situational. For example, I'm working with a young woman who has 2 young children and tells me her husband just left her without warning, without any conversation. She's left without money, resources, and 2 little kids. Has no job, let alone an opportunity to go to work or seek a job. She comes in and tells me a psychiatrist that she just met with wants to give her antidepressants. She is not clinically depressed. She is situationally depressed. Her life circumstances are at least temporarily depressing, and that makes sense. It doesn't make sense to try to medicate those symptoms. These are real life issues. Similarly, people deal with life-threatening illness, loss of livelihood, unemployment, many life situations which can cause temporary downs. Historically, even periods of vacillation or melancholia now are referred to as depression. This adds to the data and the statistics, this over-inclination to diagnose a depression when it's simply real life circumstances. Now, I'm not suggesting there are not people who are indeed clinically depressed, but they represent a much smaller percentage of the population. But as to the larger question, the theme that I am proposing is that the way that we live, the way that our culture is inducing us to live, is indeed depressing. We live in such a highly intense and competitive culture in which we tend to be cut off from one another for the purposes of succeeding, competing. Individualism to the extreme are all depressing. We've lost a sense of community and cooperation with one another, which have been life-sustaining all throughout history until more recently. Some of the values of our culture are inclining us to indeed feel depressed. Our operating worldview, how we see reality operating, was very much informed by the work of Sir Isaac Newton in the 17th century. Newton's mechanistic universe had us picture reality, or the universe, as a giant machine with separate, distinct parts, only causally connected to one another. This machine-like universe, which we very much have integrated into our operating beliefs, has us as cogs in the machine. There is no meaning, there's no purpose, there's no connectivity. When we take that theme and apply it centuries later to how we're living, it would end up leaving us feeling depressed. Isn't it depressing to live a life where you have no meaningful participation, where you're a cog in the machine, where you have no impact on the universe, and the universe has no impact on you? If we replace that old worldview with the emerging worldview of quantum physics and complexity theory and chaos theory, we get an entirely new vista of reality. We see a universe which is flowing, ever-changing, fully participatory, and inseparable. Now, what does that new picture do for us in regard to depression? It means that we're no longer isolated. The key to a depressive experience is a feeling of being cut off, detached, isolated, meaningless, visionless, all of the primary tenets of Newton's worldview. I'm not suggesting we simply put the eraser to the blackboard and wipe out Newton. There's a lot of good that came from his work. But when we begin to embrace and integrate the messages of the emerging worldview, I believe that depression and anxiety will begin to retreat back to levels that they ought to exist at, where there is some minor degree of pathology in any culture, but no longer an epidemic.